Good morning, everybody. I know it's raining out, and I know what that does. Everybody just sort of gets this dullness to their morning, but really appreciate you guys coming out in the hazy rain and humidity. At least it's cool in here. And welcome to Creative Mornings DC. How many people have been to Creative Mornings before? Nice. And not first-timers? Okay, good mix. Well, for those of you that don't know, Creative Mornings is a breakfast lecture series and community for creative types, and we are all over the world. We are in 172 cities, which really can blow your mind if you think about it. 3 more chapters just this month in Sherbrooke, Basel, and Tyumen. Where's Katerina? Totally. Russia, Tyumen, Russia? Tumen? I don't know. Okay, good. Nobody knows if I pronounced that right or not. It's good to know. There are 36 events just today, and we have a really great community. I was just talking earlier about how one of our speakers, who was here last time we were at National Geographic with Nicole Tong, awesome. So she was really great photographer in conflict areas who does amazing photography, who is based out of Istanbul and yet made it all the way here to talk to us about her photography and her experiences. And I just saw last night on Twitter that our counterparts in Sydney saw her talk from here and are bringing her down there to talk at the Adobe conference in Asia Pacific. And that's the type of community that we have. When these things are happening and you don't even know they're happening, and then one day it's sort of like, oh wow, we've made this global connection. We also just spent some time in New York at the headquarters reminiscing with the team up there, and it's really fun for us. We get to see it more, and we encourage you to check out what's going on the website and on Twitter with the other chapters as well, because just really amazing things going on around the world. So I do want to start by telling all of you, you look great today. What we've been doing is this sort of passing of the peace thing, which I really enjoy. It's hard to get everybody to shut up, so I want you to take 60 seconds, turn to somebody that you don't know, tell them that they look great today. Go. Awesome. I love how easy it is for everybody to just jump. From up here, at least, it looks like everybody just jumped right into the middle of the most engaging conversation in the world. It's really impressive. But again, I think this is all about community. We hope that you're meeting new people, you're seeing people that you met last time, and that those relationships are enduring in both personal, business, and other ways. How many people were with us last month? Cool. So we were at Studio Theater. Studio Theater is one of our favorite places, actually the place that we've spent the most time at our events. And we had a great talk on the theme of serendipity. Catalina Mayorga from El Camino Travel talked about her approach both in her personal life and in her business. She owns a very unique travel agency that focuses on cultivating experiences. And she talked to us about the sort of balance that you need to strike to embrace serendipity. It's not something that you just let happen to you. You need to put yourself into the situation that gives you access to serendipity. And then sometimes you need to cast it aside and recognize where you need to take action and do something and sort of take a hold of the situation. So it was a really great talk and a really great time. The video's up on our website. I encourage you to check it out. And afterwards, then you can go right over to El Camino Travel and book a trip, because I think that's what everybody in the room was thinking when they left. And today we're here at this great place. Let's give National Geographic a huge hand. It's such a great space and such great people and such a great organization. We really appreciate all they do, and they go above and beyond, help us find just really unique points of view to feature here, and they tell me they love having us here. So it's really great when we have these kinds of relationships, this sort of reciprocity where everybody wins, and we're really appreciative of everything they're doing for us. Also have to thank our title partners this year. Huge, you guys hear me say this every single time, but it's really important. Huge Capital One, DC United, Edelman, and JustWorks are supporting us for the whole year. Do we have anybody here from our title partners today? All right, there's a woo, there's in the back, there's a very tentative hand up over here. I'm afraid I'm going to make them come up and sing or something. So we can't do this without them. We really appreciate all of their support of both everybody here and their colleagues. But it's not enough for me to say it. We hope you take the time to either tweet, retweet, or just find those people who are afraid of admitting who they are and give them a big hug for us. We would appreciate it. Also, very appreciative of both Vigilante Coffee and Baked and Wired, who helped us out in waking up this morning. So big thanks to them. And then this type of thing takes a village. All these great volunteers are here today or helping us out in between our events, and we want to thank them. If you'd like to be a volunteer, you can email us at dc@creativemornings.com or find Raquel, who's in the back in the pink cardigan there, and with a shirt that says "Make Love." So go tell her, I want to volunteer. She'll hook you up, and we hope to see you at an upcoming event. So as you may know or are learning, we actually have a theme every month that is shared globally. So it's up to different chapters to interpret the theme in different ways. As I said, last month our theme was serendipity, and this month it's survival. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can go with that theme. We decided to go all in on it. You might imagine with a bunch of creatives, it's like how to survive a client review or something like that. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to go big with survival, and so we wanted to go global and talk about the implications of what's going on in our world and our survival as a global community. So without further delay, I want to introduce our speaker, Victoria Herrmann. Let's give her a big hand.
Thanks. So, how many of you guys remember Choose Your Own Adventure books from when you were younger? All right, some good hands. For those of you who didn't raise your hands, Choose Your Own Adventure was a series of books where you, the reader, were the protagonist. And throughout the book, you'd be given choices of how you wanted the plot to advance. And ultimately, you got to choose your ending to your adventure. So you'd be on a mission to find the lost city of Atlantis, and you'd be reading through the pages, and you would get to one that had two choices on it. Do you go explore the sea cave, turn to page 43, or do you follow a mermaid, go to page 72? You choose, and then decision after decision, you'd progress through the book until you got to that dreaded page with a big, bolded, "The End." Choose Your Own Adventure is pretty much the ultimate survival book. The series is all about keeping you and your story alive for as long as you possibly can, which, as a 10-year-old, is usually following the mermaid. So in the spirit of Creative Mornings theme this month of survival, we're going to play our own Choose Your Own Adventure. Is everyone ready? Yeah? Cool. You are a team of explorers, of researchers and storytellers. And National Geographic has brought you here to their headquarters this morning because they need your help. They want to tell America's climate change story, but they're not sure what that story is. Your mission to figure that out. Your first assignment will take you 3,600 miles north to Shaktoolik, Alaska. To get there, you have to take a flight from DC across the country to Seattle, then up to Anchorage, further up to Nome, and finally a 45-minute prop plane ride around the Norton Sound to Shaktoolik. As you're on that final flight, you can't quite tell what's water and what's land. From this angle, nothing looks solid, including the 1-mile sand and gravel spit that Shaktoolik sits on. As your plane finds a narrow runway, the threat to the village is obvious. Shaktoolik's location, surrounded by water, means that it is vulnerable to flooding and shoreline erosion from both sides. You see, in normal years, ice would form around the island so that when storms came in, waves would break miles out instead of onto people's homes. But climate change is happening twice as fast in Alaska as it is here in Washington, D.C. That means that air and water temperatures are warming twice as fast. With all that heat, the ice is no longer forming. And with no ice, there is no barrier between those fall storms and the village itself. Now, as the plane gets closer, you see that there are thousands of logs on the beach. They've washed ashore as driftwood from the Yukon Delta further south. They might look beautiful on a calm summer morning like this one, but when those storms come through, the waves drive the logs into people's homes and critical infrastructure like the tank farm. Now, that's one side. When that is combined with river flooding on the other, Shaktoolik becomes an island, stranding its residents and requiring an evacuation to the elevated school building or off of Shaktoolik completely. Here in the mid-Atlantic, it takes on average 2 hours for an emergency evacuation to happen in an extreme weather event. In Shaktoolik, that could take up to 5 days. You want to hear more about this on your assignment, and graciously, when you land, Gary, a community member, construction worker, and really innovative gardener, has offered to take you upstream to his camp to tell you about the history of the community and its vulnerability through that time. Now, on your way in, some of you saw that we had baskets. And we asked you to choose between two, because just as you're about to get on the boat, Kirby pulls up on his four-wheeler and offers to just take you to the old site of the community and show you the history. So you have a choice. Do you stay the course and go upstream, or do you hop on the four-wheeler with Kirby and go to the old site? Now, I asked Joel to tally these up, and he's going to bring up the answer of this first choose your own adventure decision. Thank you very much. And survey says we are going upriver. So you get on the boat and you're going through this impossibly curvy river. As you're going, you see hawks swooping and eagles flying overhead, and you pass by melting permafrost. And as it's thawing, you can feel how much of the cold is coming off of it. It's a power like you've never experienced before. But you have to leave the permafrost behind and go further upstream to Gary's cabin. He's building it out of reclaimed wood from the village's dump, and there's a garden sprawled around the cabin. He settles down and pours you a cup of coffee from his thermos, and in the quiet of his cabin, he starts telling you about the future and past of his community. One day, we'll have a catastrophic event. It's just a matter of time, he begins. He's right. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers identifies Shaktoolik as one of 4 villages in Alaska that are at the highest risk of becoming uninhabitable from flooding and erosion. That flooding from the river and those storm surges will force Shaktoolik to either relocate further inland or be displaced to another community. But it's not the first time that Shaktoolik has moved in its history. About 2 miles down from the current site sits an array of abandoned wooden buildings. Over the years, waves have crashed onto it, and now the shore is eroded, and many of them teeter on the edge. This is where the community used to live, and what's often referred to by residents as Old Site. In the 1930s, the Bureau of Indian Affairs built a public school here, and the community moved in for about 30 years. But storm damage forced the community further up. Before the 1930s, Shaktoolik actually moved once before, from the mouth of the river further inland again to escape erosion. These 3 moves in Shaktoolik's history prove that despite environmental vulnerabilities and ecological hazards, the social cohesion and the traditional knowledge passed down from generation to generation has made the community resilient to these changes. It proves that Shaktoolik can withstand even the most intense survival tests. You thank Gary and travel back to Shaktoolik, and by the time you get back to town, it's around dusk. You start walking down Shaktoolik's only road and smile at all of the brightly colored buildings. A few years back, the mayor asked people to paint their homes their favorite colors, so you see lots of different colors in Shaktoolik. You keep walking and you pass by the state-of-the-art school, which you'll be sleeping at later this evening, and across the way, a community center, complete with a slushie machine and a pool table. On nights like this, parents are out in the tundra collecting berries and filling their buckets, while kids are playing on trampolines, making use of the last rays of sunlight before curfew. The 260 mainly Inupiat residents of Shaktoolik are warm and welcoming, and you can't go down the street without someone stopping you to say hello at least every 5 minutes. The mayor, Eugene Siksik, is no exception. Now, he has a tendency to stop you daily, checking in and making sure everything is going okay. And throughout these daily check-ins, he's created a long list of community-led improvement projects. The community has put in their own water and sewer systems, which most rural communities in Alaska do not have. He has brought renewable energy with 2 wind turbines, and most recently, he has led the community in building a berm, a gravel and debris-filled barrier on the beach, so that when those waves comes, it hits the berm first before going on and hitting people's homes. To hear that story, he wants to send you to the Native Corporation and Fred Segunik, the manager, who led the project. But you're kind of tired of talking and you just want to go down to the beach and see the berm yourself. So again, we are a democratic choose your own adventure and are going to vote on what decision we're going to make. By a show of hands, how many of you want to ignore Eugene and go down to the river? All right, a few rebels in the crowd, not that many. How many of you want to listen to Eugene and go talk to Fred? All right, more on the safe side. So you're walking down to the end of the village and you spot a 2-story building. On the first floor is the grocery store, and the second is where the Native Corporation has their offices. So you climb the stairs, and unsure of what door is right, you cautiously knock and hope for the best. Thankfully, Fred opens the door, and after you tell him that you're there to hear about the berm, he brings out map after map to show you the erosion problem. But it's not the erosion problem that Fred wants to talk about. It's political will and funding. You see, Shaktoolik has been trying to either relocate the community, build a berm, or build an evacuation road to the foothills for years. But they haven't been able to mobilize funding or political will to do so. he explains that they've been frustrated because they've had meetings for about a decade with nothing actually being constructed. So the community has taken it upon themselves through the corporation to self-finance the berm and used materials local to the community to build it. Now, the berm won't be enough to save Shaktoolik. Eventually, the community will need to relocate further inland if it is still to survive as an intact community. But the self-reliance, the resiliency, and the strength of the community behind that berm might well be enough to save it. So, you've had a really amazing time in Shaktoolik, and you don't want to leave, but you have to go back to National Geographic and tell them what America's climate change story is, and an audience of many people, what your story will be. In our last Choose Your Own Adventure choice, we have a decision to make. Do we tell a story of Shaktoolik as victim, as a community on the front lines of climate change with an uncertain future? Or do we tell a story of climate change heroes, one of an at-risk community, but with champions and the strength to pull through whatever survival challenges they may face? Again, by a show of hands, how many want to tell a story of Shaktoolik as victim? Shaktoolik as heroes. I also chose option 2. You see, over the past year and a half, my research partner and I have been traveling across the United States and US territories to interview hundreds of Americans from Alaska to Alabama to American Samoa. Funded by National Geographic and partnered with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, our aim was to identify what is needed at the national level to support communities like Shaktoolik that are in need of adaptation and relocation today. I came away from Shaktoolik feeling incredibly hopeful because yes, Shaktoolik is a victim. The greenhouse gases emitted in cities like DC, New York, Los Angeles disproportionately affect communities in the Arctic. Shaktoolik faces a government thousands of miles away that often disregards its needs and underfunds its requests, especially for relocation and an evacuation road. And as a native village, it has faced over a century of discriminatory civil, cultural, and economic policies. But to describe Shaktoolik as a victim of government funding and storms is a sketch of its situation and not of the community itself. It misses the self-reliance and resiliency that was painted over and over for us throughout our village, throughout our stay there. So that's why I chose to tell a story of hope. But 2 weeks after I left, a team of photojournalists from the New York Times also visited Shaktoolik. From the story on their website and the photos, I can only assume that on the surface, they had a similar experience to me. There are children playing on trampolines and parents picking berries in the tundra. But the story that they chose, a wrenching choice for Alaska towns in the path of climate change, they chose option 1, Shaktoolik as victim. Now, throughout this story, there are tropes of victimization and loss. From the beginning, it's a narrative of crisis. It begins with a dream of the community being entirely destroyed, and that berm only gets a 3-sentence mention. Now, this might make you a little bit uncomfortable after you took that virtual journey to Shaktoolik. But in a way, it's a familiar narrative, right? climate change victim on the front lines in Alaska, a community with an uncertain future that faces a vulnerability beyond what we can imagine. It fits a cookie-cutter narrative of how media portrays climate change happening along America's eroding edges. In the months before the New York Times ran a wrenching choice, they also ran Nowhere to Go Amid Alaska's Melting Ice and Should the United States Save Tangier Island from Oblivion, on a more local story of a Chesapeake Bay community facing extreme erosion. In these stories, Shaktoolik could stand in for Shishmaref, that could stand in for Tangier Island. Because in all of them, there is no agency in the community. The communities don't feel empowered in the narrative, and there is no hope present. Telling and sharing stories from the scientific to the personal is one of the most important tools we have to survive climate change. Stories help us share knowledge, facts, and experiences about the causes and effects of a warming world. But more than that, stories are how we all make sense of the world around us. That article that you read in the paper this morning or the documentary that you saw on Netflix shapes our perceptions by allowing us to see some things and not others. It's those visibilities and invisibilities that shape our perspective on any given issue. And those perceptions are what determine our actions on that issue. Now, I'm going to say that again because it's really important. The stories we tell impact how we understand climate change and are the determining factor in if we act and how we act. Now, a lot of storytelling around climate change is about communities that may not be close to where you live or where your experiences are, like Shaktoolik in Alaska. But the effects of climate change are happening all across the United States, and we all have our own climate change stories, myself included. Growing up, I would escape the highways and malls of suburbia every summer to live with my Aunt Kathy on the Jersey Shore. It was my favorite part of the year. I'd play wiffle ball with my cousins and attempt to learn to surf. Every summer, storms would always force us inside a few nights and would kill the lights, but we'd still have fun. Surrounded by candles, we'd sit at the kitchen table with Jiffy Pop and tell stories of the last storm to hit New Jersey and make bets on how much of the shore would be eroded with this one. I was living 200 miles down the coast here in Washington, D.C. when Hurricane Sandy hit in October 2012. Not being home for what was hyped up to be a big storm, I called my friends and family to make sure that they were prepared. And they all assured me that they were. By the time Sandy was through, it would become the worst storm to ever hit my home state on record. It killed 37 people and caused upwards of $30 billion of damage in New Jersey alone. Watching the storm unfold in the news, being here in DC, I tried to take stock of what had survived and what hadn't. There were videos of our home with mounds of sand in the front yard, and 13th Ave, where my parents first met, was badly battered. Taylor Pavilion on the boardwalk, where I would meet with friends, was non-existent. I didn't know how to understand that a place that I grew up, a place that I loved, could be destroyed in a matter of days. But by the time I got back to New Jersey a few days later, something had changed. New Jersey had come together like never before in my lifetime. We had rallied around the slogan "Jersey Strong," a motto of determination that we would rebuild the shore. It was spray painted on plywood, quickly screened onto t-shirts, and blasted everywhere on radios and TV fundraisers. The New York Times even ran a series of articles about Jersey Strong and a photo essay. And that changed the narrative from a shattered, battered Jersey Shore to one of resilience and building it back. How could you not feel hopeful? Of course, I'm a New Jersey girl. I had to include Bruce. But how could you not feel hopeful, right? Republicans and Democrats were coming together to assure us that we would build back the shore. Bruce Springsteen was playing Born to Run for the Jersey Shore. No one questioned that our future was hopeful, that we would come back from this with Jersey Strong. When we constantly see stories about communities in crisis as sea levels rise and hurricanes like Sandy hit more and more, we come away with preconceived notions that communities all across America's coastlines are victims in need of saving. On America's eroding edges, there is no hope that we saw in New Jersey. It's painted like the articles of Shaktoolik and Shishmaref and Tangier Island, as a story of hopelessness, of an uncertain future, but a seemingly inevitable defeat. That narrative is wrong, and it is dangerous. Feeling of hopelessness about a situation is cognitively associated with inaction and predicts not being able to follow your goals. So that means when you perceive Shaktoolik as a hopeless situation, as a community with an inevitable ending, you are less likely to act to help to save it. Now, imagine if you are a politician or a policymaker and you perceive Shaktoolik as hopeless, as a community without any agency over their future. You too wouldn't act. You wouldn't act on allocating funding or passing legislation to help them build a berm or an evacuation road or to relocate. But storytelling climate change doesn't have to be this way, because just like our choose your own adventure, it is a series of choices. We shouldn't be choosing the storytelling option that fits with our frames of victimization about climate change. Instead, at each juncture when we have a choice, we should always be choosing the decision that will allow for community agency and that community's goals to show. We've already started to change this narrative in cities. After President Trump decided to pull out the United States from the Paris Agreement, cities across the country rose up in defiance and said that they would still limit their greenhouse gas emissions. Across newspapers, TV channels, and radio, there was a spirit of hope that the United States could still move forward in climate action through its cities, regardless of national stagnation. We need to extend that climate of hope to America's shorelines, because communities like Shaktoolik are pioneering the adaptations that must parallel the mitigation triumphs that cities are having today. And there are sea level rise warriors all across the United States and US territories. I know because I've seen them. In American Samoa, Andar Samoa is restoring the mangroves in her home village of Leone to stop shoreline erosion and restore a healthy ecosystem. In Miami, Keelam Bishop sits on the Sea Level Rise Committee to ensure that Little Haiti has a voice in the decisions that Miami is making about climate change and its future. And in southern Louisiana, communities all along the bayou are pioneering salt-resistant crops to ensure food security and cultural security, as they know the salt waters from the Gulf will continue on. These adaptations stretch across red and blue states, and they can bind us all together in the adaptations that we'll all need to have in the future. And when I say all, I really mean all of us. By the end of this century, at least 414 towns, cities, and villages across the United States will be partially underwater, no matter how much we reduce our greenhouse gases today. That equates to 4.3 million people being displaced from their homes. And that's at the low end of NASA sea level rise predictions. At the high end, 13 million of us will be affected by climate change. So what do? We start by telling stories of hope and of heroes. We're at a point today where every decision that we make in telling America's climate change story counts, including the foundation of what story we're telling. Let's start by changing the narrative in conversations you have with friends, in questioning the stories that you read in the newspaper, online, or the documentaries, to not see them as victims, but as heroes. Let's give communities the space so that instead of reporting on of America's first climate change refugees, we tell stories of the heroes in those communities that are doing everything they can to make sure their community doesn't become those refugees. Last month, Taylor Pavilion on the Jersey Shore reopened. It was a 5-year bipartisan effort that took a lot of work and was incredibly exciting, where the community came together. The newspaper articles that morning said that this was a sign of the Jersey Shore's resurgence in the face of climate change. With a positive, hopeful narrative and the resources to act on that narrative, and a bit of Jersey Strong in Bruce, New Jersey was able to overcome their rising tides. Fred, Eugene, Gary, and the rest of Shaktoolik are trying to do the same thing within a narrative of hopelessness. Let's give them a chance by changing that narrative and giving them the resources to act. Because once we start talking about heroes and hope, they'll not only survive climate change, but they'll thrive. And not just Shaktoolik, but all communities in America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I do want to we do have a little time for questions if anybody has any, maybe 2 or 3 questions about what Victoria was talking about. Yeah, right here.
I was wondering how you're disseminating the stories or what that's going to be.
Yeah, so all of these stories you can see on the National Trust for Historic Preservation's website. You can go to www.savingplaces.org or americaserodingedges.org. We're updating that a little bit delayed, but as we go along. There'll also be some more policy-oriented and peer review from this qualitative data set of interviews that we've been conducting. And as a response to communities wanting to change this narrative, we're actually working with a few communities, Shaktoolik included, to create a documentary about climate change heroes. And hopefully they'll be able to use that with funding bodies and others to show that there's an alternative narrative with agency. And you can check that out at erodingedges.com.
When it comes to all the large coastal cities like Boston, Seattle, San Francisco that are eventually going to be at least partially or fully flooded, is there anything basically being done to help accommodate those residents that are going to have to move out eventually, or something being done to the infrastructure to prepare for this?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of programs already in place in many communities that are working on hard armoring or soft armoring to try to keep the integrity of their shoreline as much as possible. One thing that I think communities and cities could really work on is making sure that those infrastructure investments parallel social investments and cultural investments, because one of the biggest problems of community members being displaced is that they are displaced as households, and then they're accommodated as households rather than neighbors or communities. So that means when you move, you don't have your neighbor to ask to water your plants anymore, or you don't have that block party. And those social ties are really important to resiliency. So one thing that I think cities across the country can do is make sure that they're investing in the social cohesion and community cohesion equally to infrastructure investments.
Cool. Well, over here.
Every story or narrative needs to have a good name, and I think climate change is a name that feels like passive and cryptic and kind of underwhelming. Do you think there's a better name for the narrative, like stop eating bacon and driving cars, guys?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure. I think for me, it's not so much that we need to change climate change, because it's already really ingrained in our culture. And as a scientific community, we actually made a decision to switch from global warming to climate change to try to make it more clear what was happening to the planet and what to expect if you didn't know that it wasn't just about warming temperatures. I think that it should constantly be an evolving conversation, right? That we can keep making sure that we're being as clear as possible. But I would say that before we get to changing the name of climate change to be more sexy, maybe we can make the poster children of climate change more sexy. So instead of reading about America's first climate change refugees, we talk about America's first climate change heroes. And that's a story that people can get excited about and can have really equally amazing photos for.
Cool. One more here.
Well, thank you so much for your talk. And I just had one quick question about the animals, not just the people, and all these like fragile ecosystems, because I feel like for us it's so easy to move. I mean, relatively easy, but we're in control of what we're doing. But then we kept seeing all these stories about like polar bears, and I'm not sure how like dire the situation is. So what has been your experience with nature in general?
Yeah, so as a disclaimer, I do not work with any animals other than humans. So this is kind of out of my sphere of influence, although I know people in the audience probably have much more information about this. My experience with animals is in relation to humans through subsistence living. So places like Shaktoolik rely heavily, both culturally and for food security, on the animals and plants around them. And the berries, I know not animals, but the berries that I referenced in this talk, this season was pushed back 2 months, I think, which meant that the community wasn't ready for that harvest. And they freeze those berries to make sure they have enough food throughout the winter. So those shifting cycles, it affects the animals, which I'm sorry I can't really talk to because I don't know enough about. But those shifts in animals that I can attest to are in these coded interviews, that you can see that there are changes in the animals, in the seasons, in the plants that are really directly affecting the communities.
Great. Let's give Victoria another big hand. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming. I did want to touch on a couple things before everybody jumps and runs off to work. One is this is a great venue. It's a great building and great people, as we said. There are actually a ton of great programs going on that you should definitely check out if you get the chance. One coming up is the Nat Geo Nights, which is something that happens every month, and I guess Victoria was the first speaker at the inaugural event, so like just to bring everything together. This next one is about sharks, and you can check it out at nationalgeographic.org/dc/events, as well as their other events, and really come back, enjoy it, and show them some love and enjoy. Two other things with Nat Geo. We had a late game entry from the UX team here, I think. They're looking for a creative developer with a penchant for journalistic storytelling and pushing the boundaries of web technology. If you're familiar with their projects, you should go check out, there's Hiking the Grand Canyon. Oh, and Bear's Eye View is magnificent. If you haven't seen it, you work in digital, you should check it out. And then if you see yourself in that spot, definitely want to apply. You can email luke.miller@natgeo.com to learn more about the position. Also, National Geographic is running, has a community called Chasing Genius that is about finding great new ideas in the world from people like normal people like us. And they currently have a challenge running on with submissions going through the end of July, where by presenting just a 1-minute video and a write-up on what your genius idea is in one of 3 categories, you can be awarded $25,000 to pursue that idea. I really, really hope people here. It's a super easy thing to do. I would love it if somebody from our DC community won 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 of the prizes. Would be awesome. So I really encourage people to check it out. The submission deadline's at the end of July, but the sooner you post something, the more visibility it'll get because it'll be earlier in the process, and I think has sort of head start on rising to prominence. So please check that out, and you can go to natgeochasinggenius.com and grab one of these postcards out in the lobby. Lastly, how many people have been to Little Salon before? Awesome. See, that woo is, I knew there was going to be a woo in there. Little Salon is awesome. It's perfect for this community, and you should definitely check that out. But from the people who bring us Little Salon this summer is Little Academy, their summer school program. So they've already had a class or 2, but they're running into early August, and you should definitely check out. They've got just a really diverse perspective or set of options for classes, including protest music. The Bachelor, I think, was in there, which I'm not surprised if you know the guy who brings us Little Salon, Little Academy. So suffice to say, a lot of really great classes. They're very small. They all take place at Bourbon in Adams Morgan, and I encourage you guys to check it out. As always, you can find us on social media to keep up on the goings-on in between our events, and as well as to find announcements of our next event and videos and photos from this one. So check out all your pretty faces on our photo stream. And you can always go to creativemornings.com and creativemornings.com/DC to check out everything that we have going on as well. Other than that, thank you so much. I hope it's not raining out, and we'll see you in July.